Today we're going to talk about dimensionality reduction, introduction to that, and afterwards its application. So first, introduction to dimensionality reduction and what that is. By the way, please feel free to interrupt me, whether you are online or in person. Just let me know when you want to discuss or talk about something. So manifold hypothesis. So at first, what is data set? Consider a measurement of a quantity. It can be anything. There's personal health data, images, or the specific thing, and any kind of measurement that you have. We can consider a set of these instances as a data set, and each point as a data point. Each point can be multidimensional data. For example, an image, its dimensions or features are its pixels. For personal health data, it can be different features such as age, blood pressure, and different things. So if you put them together, every data point can be considered as a vector in the space. And if you put the vectors column-wise or row-wise next to each other, you will have a matrix of data. So your data set will be considered as a matrix. And as you capture your data, usually naturally, and your data is natural, it's not noise, random noise, they usually lie on a submanifold. They don't cover the whole space. Do you agree with me? Or, yeah, because if it's random noise, of course, it might be everywhere. For example, assume your data is 3D, right? And then, and if it is random noise, it can cover the whole area in here. But if it's just the images of a scene where you can see trees and these things, and assume that you only have 3 pixels, hypothetically, then you only have some points in this space, specific regions in this space, not the whole area in this room. It means that the data points lie on some subspace. So they don't cover the whole space because they are not random. They are usually natural data, not noise. And then, for example, here in figure A, you can see that there are 3D data points, but they lie on a linear hyperplane or plane here because we are 3D. And they might be also nonlinear. So the subspace or submanifold can be nonlinear, such as here. As you see, it's not a linear plane. Although locally, topologically speaking, it's a plane again. However, it's nonlinear. It's embedded in this space. And you can also note that here, so whenever it's linear, we usually call it subspace. Whenever it's nonlinear, we usually call it submanifold or manifold.
Get my, oh, we're go ahead.
Okay. So, and what is manifold hypothesis? Manifold hypothesis says that data points usually lie on some submanifold. They don't cover the whole space.
You always have the assumption of.
Yes. Even if it's not smoothness of submanifold, you can fit some smooth submanifold usually.
Okay.
So you want to fit some submanifold, which is usually smooth because smoothness is easier to work with and take derivative. Okay. So categories of dimensionality reduction. We can divide, generally speaking, we can divide dimensionality reduction into 3 categories. Although I know that some of you might say there is a 4th one, we'll talk about that too, but there is a spectral methods, there are probabilistic methods, and there are neural network-based methods, or deep methods. Someone might say, okay, there are Riemannian methods too. However, we can say that we can cover Riemannian methods in these categories, so it can be considered as a subcategory. And we'll talk about each of these categories. So the first one, category, which is spectral dimensionality reduction, usually they have geometrical approach. And they usually reduce at the end, when you solve the optimization problem of these methods, they usually reduce to generalized eigenvalue problems. And I assume that all of you know what eigenvalue and generalized eigenvalue problems are, but just for a brief review. So whenever you have a matrix, what is eigenvalue and eigenvector? Whenever you have a matrix, this matrix shows some important directions in the space usually. And these directions, you can consider them as eigenvectors. So we have different types of matrix decomposition. And what is matrix decomposition is that whenever you decompose a matrix into multiplication of 2 or 3 or multiple matrices, that's called matrix decomposition.
Does someone have their mic on over there? Okay.
One of the decompositions is eigenvalue decomposition. And eigenvalue decomposition gives you the important directions of matrix. An example, when you have data, and when your matrix is a covariance matrix, what are the important directions of the covariance matrix? They are the directions of variance of the data or spread of data. So whenever you get the eigenvectors of the covariance matrix, you will get the directions where the data are spread. And that's exactly PCA, which we'll cover. And eigenvalues are the amount of that importance of the directions. And generalized eigenvalue problem is a more generalized eigenvalue problem where you have another matrix. So you have two matrices kind of. And spectral methods usually reduce to those eigenvalue problems. And also they have geometrical approach where you can see it like this. For example, in figure 8, you can see that they are lying on a nonlinear manifold, and we want to unfold it in the space. So we know that this is the subspace, the submanifold. Then the submanifold is locally 2D, two-dimensional, although it's embedded in this three-dimensional space. So we can unfold it, and it will become a 2D plane because they're actually locally 2D. If you apply, as this is a nonlinear manifold, if you apply a nonlinear dimensional reduction method, you will get figure B. So it unfolds it correctly because it's considering its geodesic distances. However, if you apply a linear method, you will ruin it. Something like if you apply PCA on that, for example, which is a linear method, you will ruin that because it only considers the Euclidean distances between them and not the geodesic distances along the manifold. Therefore, for example, the green point and the red point, which are far away from each other, they will collapse onto one point almost because you applied linear methods. So these are spectral methods. And what are the probabilistic methods? Okay, consider this figure, for example. You have a sculpture and you are looking at it from different angles, right? So you can see that all of them are showing the same thing. And all of the images are the same sculpture. What is the only difference between these?
The angle, yeah.
The angle, exactly. The angle. We can see it as 2 or 3 angles. The difference is just angles. So we can say that your data, your observed data, which are the images xi, are conditioned on some latent variable, latent random variable, which that actually plays the important role. Because xi where, for example, here the pixels are not important, the angle is important. And the angle is making the important role here. So probabilistic dimensional reduction says that I assume that the data is a multidimensional random variable. However, it's conditioned on a latent value, a lower dimensional latent random variable. So if you assume that this latent random variable is lower dimensional than the actual data, then you will have dimensional reduction if you try to find this lower dimensional random variable. So this is what, and you can by probabilistic graphical model, you can draw it as this. So we try to find the Zi. And another approach is neural network-based or deep dimensional reduction. And so it has an information theoretic approach. You might say, how is it related to that? Because it's that, well, you usually have an encoder and decoder, and you try to pass your data through a bottleneck. And initially, your data has huge dimensions, but when you try to pass it through a bottleneck and kind of reconstruct it, you have to only preserve the most important features. So that's why it has an information theoretical approach, because it says that by information theory, I only want to preserve the most important information through the bottleneck. And that's the approach of neural network, where we can implement this figure A by an autoencoder where we have an encoder and the decoder where the latent space has lower dimensions. And when we try to learn this, is dimensionality reduction. So a brief history of dimensionality reduction. First, let's talk about history of spectral dimensionality reduction. So it all started from 1901, when the first paper on principal component analysis was proposed. It was about 4 years before Einstein's special relativity. So, and in oh, by the way, that was the first dimensionality reduction method. Also, it was the first unsupervised method for dimensionality reduction. Also, it was the first linear dimensionality reduction method. Afterwards, Fisher discriminant analysis was proposed. Who here knows Ronald A. Fisher? You know that. Okay, almost. So Ronald A. Fisher, I can say if he wasn't alive, we wouldn't have the modern statistics at all. So I think by this sentence, you will understand his importance. He proposed variance. So and can you imagine the modern statistics without variance? He proposed variance and a lot of things. And that's why you can see most of his works are based on variance, like ANOVA and all of those areas. So also Fisher discriminant analysis is based on variance and scatters of data. He was kind of obsessed with variance. We can see that this was the first linear method for supervised dimensionality reduction. And he used that for genetics because he was a scientist in genetics. Then multidimensional scaling was proposed in that area at that time, where it says that let's try to preserve either the relative similarity or the relative distances between the data points. Initially, it was a linear approach, but afterwards, in 1969, someone named Salmon proposed some method which was kind of a special case of multidimensional scaling, and we call it now Salmon mapping. And you can see that as a first nonlinear method for dimensionality reduction. And he tried to preserve the distances between the points, and that was the first nonlinear method. In 1997 to 1998, almost kernel PCA was proposed. So you can see the time, almost a century passed until the kernel method of PCA was proposed. And if you want to know, the kernel initially was in the Hilbert space, so it was in pure math and functional analysis, and afterwards it came to the area of physics. And then someone took it and used it for SVM, kernel SVM, and afterwards, so it came to machine learning, and then kernel PCA was proposed. If you have nonlinear data, how do you handle nonlinear data? You have two approaches. Either you design a nonlinear algorithm to handle that nonlinear data, or you transform your data in a way that it becomes all hopefully linear. Then you apply your linear algorithm. So the second approach that I talked about is the kernel method. So because kernel applies some transformational data, and you can apply a linear method such as PCA on it. In 2000, the isometric mapping, or in short, ISOMAP, and a local linear embedding LLE were proposed as two back-to-back papers in Science journal. They were breakthrough, and we can say they were the most prestigious nonlinear methods at that time. So ISOMAP says that, okay, let's consider multidimensional scaling which we had before, but now rather than using Euclidean distances in that, let's use probabilistic distances or approximation of that in that. And what is LLE? LLE is propose some idea which I can say that it's the core idea behind all nonlinear manifold learning methods. Fit locally, but think globally. So you're saying that you have some data points, don't look at them at once. Look at them by neighbor, fit locally. Hopefully the global structure will be preserved. This is the idea of LLE. In 1999 and to about 2001, the spectral clustering and Laplacian eigenmap were proposed. So they said that let's consider data set as a graph. So, let's take the Laplacian of that graph and use that for clustering. That was called spectral clustering. That was a breakthrough again. And they adopted that idea of spectral clustering for dimensionality reduction. That resulted in Laplacian eigenmap. So in 2003, that was interesting. Benjo, they wrote several papers, many papers actually, and that many of them are technical reports you can see on the internet. They said, okay, all of the spectral methods that you have found so far, all the same thing. They are kernel PCA. They're just learning the eigenfunctions of the kernel. So they're just learning eigenfunctions. And that was some shock to the scientists. They said, okay, whatever, we are reproducing the same algorithm. And in 2004, the idea that, okay, everything is the same and they are learning different kernels for kernel PCA, someone said, why don't I learn the best kernel? Let me learn the best kernel for dimensionality reduction, and that was called semi-definite embedding. Why? Because they could form that as a semi-definite programming optimization. And that time, it was a hot topic in optimization. They also renamed it afterwards to maximum variance unfolding, because it unfolds the data to its maximum variance, and it finds a kernel to do that. In 2005, graph embedding was proposed, where we say, okay, it tries to generalize the Laplacian-based dimensionality reduction. In 2006, spectral metric learning was proposed, saying that, okay, rather than using Euclidean distance, let's use the generalized Mahalanobis distance. We'll talk about that. And let's learn the Mahalanobis matrix. In 2005, Hilbert-Schmidt independence criterion was proposed, or HSIC, saying that, okay, when you have two random variables, it's too hard to measure their dependence. Do you agree? Dependence is very hard. Correlation is easier. Correlation is linear dependence. So if me and Morteza, if I come here and Morteza goes there, or if I come here and Morteza goes there, so either we have positive dependence or linear or negative linear dependence. And that's called correlation. However, if I come here and Morteza goes there, or if I come here, Morteza goes there, we don't know whether we are dependent or it's just random. We don't know. So dependence is much harder. However, they said that, okay, let's approximate, find the correlation of two random variables, the dependence of two random variables by this approximation. Let's pull them to the Hilbert space by kernels. And in that Hilbert space, we calculate the correlation, which is linear dependence. That's a good approximation for their dependence in the input space. That was a breakthrough. Using HSIC, supervised PCA was proposed. Yeah.
So is dependence here equivalent to causality, or are you assuming some weaker notion of causality?
I can say I'm not much deep into causality area, but I can say that dependence is that whenever you have two random variables that they are kind of related, it might be non-linearly related. As long as I think you can form it as a probabilistic graphical model. As long as they can be related to each other, they are dependent, either linearly or non-linearly. Yes. Okay.
If we're discussing the case of non-linear dependence.
But it might be linear too. So both linear is a special case of non-linear dependence. Yeah. So we are saying that we can approximate the dependence of them by their correlation in the Hilbert space.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Is you okay?
Yeah, sorry, is that different from saying the mutual information is not zero?
The mutual, yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So supervised PCA was proposed by Ghojogh et al. You might know Ali Ghojogh. He also has done a lot of work in dimensionality reduction. So they said that let's maximize the dependence of class labels and the projected data. So again, using H6, so they calculated the H6 between the labels and the projected data. And they came up with an algorithm. They suddenly saw, oh, by the way, PCA is a special case of, supervised PCA is a special case of PCA. So they called it supervised PCA, and that was also a breakthrough. Now, history of probabilistic methods. In 1954, factor analysis was proposed. And what is factor analysis? Again, it says that we have some data. It has some latent variable. Do you remember the probabilistic approach that we talked about? Like the angle. Let's learn that latent variable using expectation maximization and maximum likelihood estimation. Probabilistic PCA was proposed in 1997 to 1999. That's a special case of factor analysis where you assume that the noise is like a sphere. It's identity matrix. And afterwards, about 1984, the Johnson-Lindström or JL lemma was proposed. It was a breakthrough too. It said that, oh, you're trying to learn the projection matrix? You're trying to do. I project to some random subspace by a random projection matrix, and it works well. Why are you learning that? I do it randomly, and it works well, roughly. Of course, not very well as other algorithms, but it works roughly. And that was a breakthrough, which was a shocking finding in the science. So random projection was proposed. Also, in 1991, sufficient dimension reduction was proposed. In statistics, they usually call dimensionality reduction as dimension reduction. It's a convention. And they use sufficient dimension reduction for regression. If you go to regression area in the statistics, you will see a lot of SDR and sufficient dimension. It says that I want to find some linear projection because you can consider linear regression as a linear projection in a way that the labels, the information of labels are preserved. And then kernel dimensionality reduction was proposed as a special case of sufficient dimension reduction in 2003. In 2003, also a stochastic neighbor embedding was proposed by Hinton and Sam Royce, and which is the backbone of t-SNE. And in t-SNE 2008, it was proposed, which was state of the art for a long time. And then in 2018, UMAP or Uniform Manifold Approximation and Projection was proposed. And both of these, which are state of the art, t-SNE and UMAP, are neighborhood preserving methods. History of neural network-based dimensionality reduction. In 1983 to 1986, restricted Boltzmann machine was proposed. Okay, that was very old. Yes.
So what does it mean for something to be state of the art in dimensionality reduction?
It means that most of the papers and most of the algorithms are using that, and it's having the best performance for visualization, especially for DNA visualization. We use t-SNE and UMAP a lot, so it was outperforming all other algorithms. And in 1983 to 1986, restricted Boltzmann machine was proposed by Hinton et al. Backpropagation in 1986 was proposed. In the 1990s, there was a decline in interest in neural networks because of two things: gradient vanishing. We had when we in more depth, the gradient vanished. Also, kernel SVM was working well. However, it has its own disadvantages. For example, it couldn't work on big data, and also the choice of kernel. So we had a winter of neural networks, but Hinton said, okay, Hinton still strongly believes in restricted Boltzmann machine. Even in his forward algorithm, if you see his speech, he talks about restricted Boltzmann machine. He's obsessed with that. And he said, okay, I think that a future of AI belongs to restricted Boltzmann machine and deep learning. At that time, he was very excited about that. He had a lot of talks on that. and he proposed deep leaf network, which is a stack of restricted Boltzmann machines. But however, ReLU in 2011 was proposed, also dropped out in 2014, and these two resolved the issue of gradient vanishing. So we could become deep and we could train neural network using random weights. Therefore, backpropagation was enough. So they said, okay, we don't need restricted Boltzmann machine anymore. And that was the start of when the deep learning grew a lot. And then deep metric learning was came up where we have reconstruction autoencoder, deep features, Siamese networks came up in 1993, but they were used a lot by Facebook and Google as in contrastive loss and triplet loss in 2006 and in 2015. In 2014, variational autoencoder was proposed, I think, by Maxwell et al. And they used variational inference in a neural network structure. Adversarial learning was proposed again by Goodfellow et al. In 2014, and then adversarial autoencoder by Maxwell et al. Was proposed in 2015. So briefly, I go through these briefly. So in the spectral methods, principal component analysis says that, okay, let me center the data first. Why do I need to center the data? Because if you don't center the data, you'll see this figure 8. You will not get good spread directions. So you center data first, and then you form the covariance matrix, and then you do the eigenvalue decomposition. What is this optimization? It said that I want to maximize the variance of projection, that is the variance of projection, with some constraints to make it well defined. And then it will reduce the eigenvalue decomposition for the covariance matrix. And if you reduce the dimension or the truncate the projection matrix, you will have dimensionality reduction. If you don't truncate that, you will just have a rotation of coordinates, as you see. So this is PCA. And what is FDA feature? So it says that, okay, if I have some classes, I want to, so what is the idea of, usually this is the core idea behind the supervised manifold learning almost, whatever you have. So you have several classes, in supervised you have class labels, right? You have several classes, you want to separate, you want to find a subspace or submanifold where the classes are discriminated from each other. Therefore, you are trying to increase the scatter of variance between classes. However, you can do another thing too. You can reduce the variance of each class by itself. So it does both of these at the same time. It's called Fisher criterion, and this is a Fisher discriminant analysis. You can see, for example, if you train PCA and FDA on some facial images with glasses, if you have two classes, for example, with and without eyeglasses, you will see that these are called eigenfaces by PCA and feature faces by FDA. You will see PCA doesn't care only about eyes and eyeglasses. It also captures hair and all of these areas because it's capturing the variance. However, feature faces captures the features around eyeglasses and the eyes. You can see that. So that's the beauty.
Do you mind explaining what those images are? So are they?
Yes. Yeah. So these are the projection matrices. So when you train a featured PCA or FDA on some facial images, so your data points are facial images which are vectorized.
Yeah, I understand. So you're learning the two matrices, the two U matrices?
No, we are learning, there's one U matrix, but it has several columns, right? And these are the columns. These are the columns.
Each column has different importance. So maybe the first column is the most important, and then the next. So if you add all of them together, you can reconstruct each phase, right? Okay. And the first one shows which place algorithm focus more, and the next one, and the next. Am I right?
So the individual faces are.
These are the U columns, but you reshape them as image again.
Right. So they're each of the faces is an individual U matrix.
An individual U column.
An individual U column.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And they have in order of importance.
And I guess each of the ones, they're like in some sort of like, you can treat them as
Eigenvector
components.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I see.
So these are eigenvectors of U in PCA. These are eigenvectors of U of data in FDA.
Okay, and then I guess by looking at each of those, you can see which algorithm is learning
Which features are being captured in the subspace.
and like what's the most important.
Yes, exactly. For example, here it says the hair is important to me, or skin, vice versa, doesn't matter.
Great. So you can sort of think of this as like activation maps for networks.
Exactly. It's that kind of.
Thank you.
So here MDS says that, okay, let's see. These are the similarities. Xi transpose X, similarity, cosine similarity, similarity between data points, and Y is the embedding in the subspace. So it says that similarities in the input space and similarities in the embedding space, I want to make the difference between these two minimized, right? This is the idea of MDS. As Salmon mapping says that I don't want to reduce the difference of distances, the similarities. Let me reduce the difference of distances. So you can see both the other way around, right? You can either reduce the difference of distances or similarities. So this is what Salmon mapping does, but it has an iterative solution. Again, I want to say this, it became nonlinear, and in life, so as in math, whenever you get something, you lose something, right? This is the philosophy of life and math, both. So it became nonlinear, but it lost the closed form solution. It became iterative. Also the problem of deep learning. It can handle nonlinearity, but it has a big disadvantage. It takes time. It's iterative. In isomap. So now isomap is also a special case of MDS. We can, this is a formula where we can write the gram matrix as this. So therefore, rather than using the Euclidean distance, let's use the geodesic distance. Again, for example, I want to go from this point to this point. I can either go on the sphere, or I can dig into the, assume this it's an earth, you can dig into the earth and go from here to here. If you dig into the earth, you'll have Euclidean distance. Otherwise, you will have geodesic distance. You can approximate it by piecewise Euclidean distances. And this is what the approximation that isomap uses, because calculation of this geodesic distance exactly needs Riemannian calculations. Local linear embedding says that, okay, I assume I have a nonlinear thing.
Sorry, I had another question. So for geodesic distances, you need to know the manifold of this like curvature, right, to compute it. So how do you learn it in a problem?
They don't do that. They don't calculate Riemannian manifolds. They do it approximately they approximate it by piecewise Euclidean distances.
So is it finding like some sort of shortest path between cities?
Yeah, yes. An example, I want to go from Toronto to London in UK. I can either dig into the earth from Toronto to London in UK, or I can go from Toronto to Montreal, dig into the earth, but it's not hard. I can go from Toronto to Montreal, and from Montreal to New York, from New York to somewhere, and then from that there to London.
And then the cities in your example would correspond to observed samples in whatever problem.
Yes, exactly. So it's related to it's kind of approximate. Otherwise, you need to calculate.
Okay.
Give me a minute or so.
Sure.
Keep discussing it.
is that it's like really hard to integrate over high dimensional space, right? Like in terms of like images, right? The probability distribution over like even, you know, CFAR images, I thought it's like pretty much intractable to compute.
Yes, but I can say that it is possible to do that. Even if you take a look at Riemannian optimization. Okay. For example, there is a famous book on that by Apsil. Apsil is a figure in that area. Riemannian optimization also they are working on matrix manifolds, like positive semi-definite matrix manifolds or Grassmannian manifolds, and these are matrix manifolds. The variables are not vectors, they are matrices. So I'm saying that it's worse than what you're thinking. The matrix can be bigger than vectors, but they're still doing that. They can handle it, and I think it is possible to do that. And the idea of Riemannian optimization, well, until it comes, it might be interesting to you too. So, for example, gradient descent in Euclidean descent in Euclidean space, you're saying that your x can belong to some constraint in the Euclidean space. You don't care. You only move in the direction of gradients, right? However, in Riemannian manifold, you can have gradient descent in Riemannian optimization, where you assume your x belongs to some Riemannian manifold. And in that case, you're saying that I don't want to just move like this on the landscape. I assume I'm moving on a manifold. In order to do that, they say, okay, assume I'm on the manifold. I calculate the gradient on the tangent space. So locally, I assume I'm in the Euclidean space locally. I move in that tangent space by a step, and then it's called, I think it was called retraction. You retract, or you kind of project yourself onto the manifold again. So they do it locally on the tangent space. So you have Riemannian optimization. I think you can combine these ideas. You can use Riemannian optimization or Riemannian calculations in differential geometry and these things to develop many interesting and cool algorithms. There is a guy, I think, Mertash, something. I think his name was Mertash. I'm not sure. Australia is focusing on Riemannian dimensional reduction, Riemannian machine learning. You can take a look at his papers. And I think, yeah, it's a very hot topic. And I think if you can write a paper on that, it will be published in CBPR and nerves. And I can tell.
So what is the computational cost for these?
Yeah, they have some. I haven't memorized them, but there are some computational costs for them. I don't have them on top of my mind. Sorry about that. But of course, the bigger the matrix, because these Riemannian manifolds are usually matrices for Riemannian optimization. The bigger the matrix or the vector becomes, of course, the computational cost goes up. But I don't have that.
It's still like a focus on theory.
Your highlight is how much is
theoretical.
Oh, don't worry about it. We can always schedule them for next week. So we'll prioritize your
real model type of algorithm.
Yeah, maybe that's because of their computational costs. Maybe I'm not sure. One reason might be it's hard, because as you see, even mathematical papers don't get much citation or notice because they are hard to understand. So is it recording?
yes. So it kept recording. So
Okay,
you should be good.
So MDS is this. It's not going.
Okay, you might need to select the window.
Okay. So local fitting is that. Have you heard of SP line regression and these things? So it's piecewise regression. So you have nonlinear function, but you have linear regression. You can piecewise, you can assume it's linear and do a piecewise regression. It's also called the SP line regression. The same idea adopted for manifold unfolding. You have a nonlinear manifold, you want to unfold it, you divide it into several pieces and you put pieces next to each other. Then you will see the whole thing has been unfolded. Again, you are looking at it locally, but hoping that global structure is preserved. Fit locally, think globally. So steps are three things. You first construct the kernel graph, and then you have linear reconstruction by neighbors, saying that, okay, I have some neighbors, and then I assume that I'd say every point can be reconstructed by its neighbors by some weights, linear combination, right? Let's capture it, calculate these weights, and then use the same weights in the lower dimensional space to construct the points again. So in the high dimensional space, calculate the weights, use the same weights in the lower dimensional space. So this is what local linear embedding is doing. It was a breakthrough in dimensional reduction. Laplacian-based methods. Okay, now let's consider data, because the data can be either considered as a matrix. So far it was considered as a matrix, but now let's consider it as a graph, graph theory and all of these areas. So cool. So now you calculate the Laplacian of this graph. And so this is the optimization in Laplacian eigenmap. It's inspired by spectral clustering, which also uses Laplacian. So it says that minimize this term, and Wij is the adjacency of xi and xj. The more the closer they are to each other, the more Wij you have, the larger it will be. And y and yj are their embedding in the lower dimensional space. And now you tell me, if 2 points are close to each other, what happens? Their Wij is high, right? If you want to minimize that, therefore you have to minimize this. You have to reduce the distance between yi and yj. This is exactly what we want. They were close to each other. We want to make them close to each other in the embedding space too. However, if they were far away from each other, Wij goes down, then I don't care. The cost already is down, is low. So I don't care much. So I'm fitting again locally. See that? So this is the idea between Laplace, behind Laplacian eigenmap. And graph embedding generalizes that by adding some matrix. Maximum variance unfolding. Again, there's a question.
Yeah, just a question about the graph one. Yeah. So this, like, you apply this when your data is not necessarily of a graph structure, or does it have to be? Because I think like you can do like, if you have data embeddings, you can do similarities between each data point.
Exactly. So when you have some data points, you can always form the nearest neighbor graph, right?
Yeah.
So this is the graph of this.
Okay. So like, does it if I don't know if you use this kind of stuff a lot, but does it tend to make sense to use these methods if you have to construct a graph using something like that, or if it's like if you have a data set that's like naturally graph structured? Because I'm just wondering, like, it seems like there's a lot of decisions to make when you're constructing the graph of the data, and that would affect a lot what happens with the algorithm. Right?
Yes, you have some hyperparameters. Exactly. So you either you have data and you make some graph out of it, or you have the graph initially and your social network or something.
Yeah, if you have a social network, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, but I
have to construct it back. It will still make sense to use this sort of method.
I think yes, because you can encapsulate the information of adjacency in some graph. Right? But although it has some hyperparameters as k and d. So, okay, yeah. Now, as we talked, researchers found out that many spectral algorithms are essentially kernel PCA. So someone said, let's find the best kernel. Let's find the best kernel. Now, okay, what is intrinsic dimensionality? So you have some ants on your manifold. And in this figure, your manifold is locally 1D embedded in 2D, right? So here, for example, if you put the ant embedded in 2D, on the manifold, ant is so small, doesn't see the whole structure, only sees its front. It goes. And at the end here, it reaches to the end of the manifold. So it sees the manifold as a line, right? It starts and it ends. It's a line. So the intrinsic dimensionality of this is 1D. Now consider this knot. Put the ant on it. It goes, it doesn't see the knot. It goes only in front. It reaches to where it was. Again. So it sees it as a circle. Therefore, its intrinsic dimensionality is 2D. This is what we have in algebraic topology, those areas. So this is intrinsic dimensionality. Now, let us find the best kernel for unfolding the manifold where you can gradually do that. And consider this, the Euclidean distance between xi and xj. If you open it and calculate it, you will see that it will be similar to the kernel or gram matrix between I, jj minus 2 kernel between I and j. So you will say that, okay, I want to maximize the trace of the kernel. The trace of kernel, it can be proved that it is variance of unfolding, variance of embedding. And subject to some constraints. The first constraint, I'll show it here, the proof. So I want in the embedding space the distances to be similar to the distances in embedding space be similar to the distances in the input space. Also, I want the kernel to be double centered. Again, it can be proved that it means that the mean of embedding is 0. And the kernel also should be positive semi-definite by definition. Right? So they do it and they do it iteratively. Now, spectral metric learning says that, okay, you know what?
I had a question, actually, more general question about the intrinsic dimension, and I guess a lot of the methods in general. So when you're using these methods for visualization strictly, like two-dimensional visualizations, are you always making somewhat of an assumption that the intrinsic dimensionality is 2 when you're doing that?
No, only for visualization in 2D and 3D, for example, t-SNE and UMAP, they usually do that.
Right.
But yet you might also, sometimes you might just want to reduce the dimensionality, not just for the visualization.
Right.
You might want to do it for feature extraction. You don't want to use your raw data to feed it to your machine learning model. You want to extract important features, which discriminate classes better, and then feed it to it.
So I believe the question is this a good approach for visualization?
This?
Yeah.
The MVU?
No, I guess you sort of answered my question. Like, I guess you are saying that when you are doing the visualization, you are assuming it's 2, but we don't always do that dimensionality reduction.
Sometimes you want to discriminate the classes so it becomes easier for the classifier.
Right.
Yeah. And so this is one. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Mahalanobis. Do you know Mahalanobis? Any of you? You know Ramanujan? You know, Ramanujan was a great Indian mathematician working on what does it called? I forgot in English. But equations and these things, I forgot the area in the mathematics. Number theory. And Mahalanobis was at the same time of him, about a century ago, and he was in statistics. They met in UK. So Mahalanobis said that, okay, so far we had Euclidean distance. Now consider this example. This is what Mahalanobis said. Consider this X point, and you have 2 classes, X1 and X2. When I show it to you, do you say X belongs to X1 or X2? Can someone say? X2, because it's obvious. However, by Euclidean distance, it's X1. So obvious is wrong. Euclidean distance is making a mistake. Therefore, Mahalanobis said, I want to consider the variance of classes. The more variance I have, the less distance I want to have. That's why sigma inverse you have. And now someone said, okay, let's repeat. You know that this is positive semi-definite covariance matrix. Now let's replace it with a general matrix W and with a condition on the fact that it's positive semi-definite for satisfying triangle inequality and convexity. Now, therefore, by definition, as it is positive semi-definite, I can decompose it to UU transpose, right? Then if I simplify it, it becomes this. And what is this? Can someone tell me? This, equation 9. This is exactly the Euclidean distance between the projected data points, because U transpose X is a projecting data points, but projection matrix X. This is a squared Euclidean distance, right? So it's Mahalanobis or generalized Mahalanobis distance says that let's find some subspace, project onto that subspace, so that the classes become kind of having the same variance, and then use the Euclidean distance. This is what I did. And spectral metric learning says that I want to learn this U matrix in this generalized Mahalanobis distance in a way that the classes are discriminated better. Okay, now probabilistic approaches. Okay, this, again, as it is probabilistic, we are working with likelihood and all of these things. So we have some likelihood of data.
Ask the questions. Yeah, just before we go into the probabilistic one.
Yes.
So for all the spectral based, like PCA based, does it always have the like the importance, like difference importance for each PC? Like for example, the first one is the always important.
Exactly.
Is that happens for all the methods that you talk about, like the first chunk?
All of them, you mean?
Yeah.
If you do, yes, because when you do eigenvalue decomposition, you're solving this kind of something like this, an optimization like this. Okay, most of this form of optimization reduces an optimization to an eigenvalue or generalized eigenvalue problem. And as you are maximizing or minimizing, if you are minimizing, you sort the eigenvectors by smallest eigenvalue to the largest eigenvalue. If you are maximizing, you sort the eigenvectors from largest eigenvalue to the smallest eigenvalue. And that's why they have order of importance.
Yeah. And a follow-up question is that, do we have a guideline on how many dimensions actually keep to better represent the whole data?
Yeah, you can have a plot. I think it's called the scree plot, where you draw the eigenvalues and you say, where do you have the most decline of or eigenvalue, and you can cut. That's the knee of the plot, and then that's a good cut point. Thanks. Probabilistic methods. We have some likelihood of data, xi, with a condition of some theta, some parameters, and then I have some latent variable zi, and I want this is the KL. This is KL divergence between the prior and the latent, and the conditional distribution of latent conditioned on the data. I wanna reduce this KL or maximize minus KL. And this minus KL is called elbow, evidence lower bound. Okay, look at the Bishop's book for this, you can see. And then factor analysis says that I assume that I have some latent random variable, but I also assume that there is some noise. There is some noise of uncertainty. And I try to maximize the elbow using variational invariance and expectation maximization. This is what factor analysis is. Probabilistic PCA is a special case of factor analysis, saying that, okay, I assume that it's, I think it's called isometric, right? It's a sphere. The noise is a sphere, a hypersphere. Okay, it's an identity matrix multiplied by some constant. And so it simplifies that. And it can be proved that I think PCA is a special case of probabilistic PCA, or vice versa. I think PCA is a special case of probabilistic PCA. The probabilistic metric learning, probabilistic distribution. Okay, it says that do you remember we talked about spectral metric learning? Now in probabilistic metric learning, we are saying that I assume that there is some distribution around every data point. And what is this distribution? Distribution of bin neighbor. So I can say that how much is Morteza neighbor to me and how much you are neighbor to me. Of course, Morteza is more neighbor to me than you because you're further from me. So by distance, we can make some distribution. And this is an approximation of the distribution of the Gaussian distribution. Because as you see, it's similar to the softmax form. And then you can say that, okay, I calculate this distribution in the embedded space and also in the input space. I'll try to minimize the KL divergence between these two. So from clear? Random projection, again, a breakthrough, a shocking finding And in theoretical machine learning and statistics, JL lemma says that assume that P, which is the dimensionality of the embedding space, has some lower bound, okay? And you can find a projection matrix, U transpose X is projection of data, where you can satisfy this. And what is this? F is the projected data. So the distances in the embedding space is both upper bounded and lower bounded by something. And it means that when you have 2 points in the input space, they don't fall apart from each other very far. There is some bound. Although they don't get much close, but they don't get very far it has both upper bound and lower bound, based on the distances of them in the input space. That's shocking. Although it's random, you take the columns of U random by random variables with a mean of 0 and unit variance IID. That was shocking. So SDR in regression, regression people love that. So it says that in the statistics side, X data, U transpose X is projected data. Now assume Y is labels. Consider X as random variable and Y as random variable. And he says that find U such that conditions on the projection of data, because you can see linear projection as a projected data, right? Conditioned on the projected data, these two, the data and labels are independent. So we want to find a good U or a good regression. Also, kernel dimensionality reduction is the same, but it says that I want to find a U where condition on the projection, the covariance of U stays the same. So conditioned either on data or on the projection, the covariance of the labels become the same. This is the idea of kernel dimensionality reduction. I think you know Sholkov, right? He's in Europe. He's with him, we can say he's the god of kernels. Kernel PCA, kernel SPM, all of them belongs to HSIC, which I introduced, is for his lab. I think kernel dimensional reduction is for his lab too. Take a look at his papers, very theoretical. And SNE and t-SNE. So SNE says that Pij, again, I consider the Gaussian distribution, approximated Gaussian distribution of points in the input space, also in the embedded space. Now I try to minimize the K divergence between them. Hinton and Samro is proposed there. Now, t-SNE said that, okay, although the idea seems straightforward, however, assume that I have 1 million people, okay? I have 1 million people. I want to fit them in this room. Can I do that? Can I do that? Yes or no? Of course, no. If they don't fit. What is the solution? The simplest solution that comes to your mind in order to fit them.
Comprehend them.
Let's enlarge the room. Assume that you can enlarge the room. Let's enlarge the room. SNE is trying to do that. It's trying to fit 1 million people in this room. What is people here? Is the information. High dimensional information, like 1 million people. We want to fit it in the lower dimensional spaces. It doesn't fit. It ruins the information of data. However, t-SNE says, okay, let's enlarge the room. In the embedded space, I use a student T distribution, rather Gaussian distribution, where it has heavier tails. It goes to 0 later. So it has a larger. So this is the idea of t-SNE. It improved SNE by this simple idea proposed by Hinton et al. And Lamartine. Right.
In the like biology space, there's been some critique of t-SNE that you can any sort of latent structure, like randomly initialized vectors with no inherent neighborhood structure. You can visualize it using t-SNE or UMAP in this, just because like you're introducing so much, you're adding so many degrees of freedom that you can visualize it in a way that makes sense. Do you think there's any way to sort of avoid this critique and still use a nonlinear dimensionality reduction? So
t-SNE and UMAP are nonlinear.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
If they have a random, let's say, points, they also filter something out of that. So this is the critics that people say that if you have something random, they make something meaningful out of that. So
I disagree with that. When it's random, for example, if the classes are very occupied into each other, they're busy, they don't become separated by UMAP and t-SNE. They try to preserve the structure. This is the whole idea of manifold learning. You try to preserve the global structure. Otherwise, your manifold learning algorithm doesn't work well.
Yeah, so one of the critiques is that these methods are too flexible, that they provide, you introduce so many degrees of freedom into the problem that from a visual inspection of this reduced space, it looks like there's this nice neighborhood structure, but through data set construction or through people who've investigated these properties, like through data set construction, it shouldn't have this latent structure. And then the amount of flexibility that you get is not really representative of the true data, underlying data. So is there any way to sort of go around this issue? Or, do you think like this is like a real problem or?
No, I think it's a real problem, maybe, yeah. There are, even in neural networks, you are introducing a lot of degrees of freedom. So, yeah. If you try to reduce the hyperparameters and let the parameters to be learned by the data themselves automatically, that would be a better algorithm, I think. So let the parameters be dependent on your data.
should be something like overfitting. So
you
can somehow solve the overfitting. I believe there are some sort of the, for example, parameter tuning that you can do here to avoid that.
I think one of the issues is that if you use t-SNE and you don't get a coherent structure, what you do, you just change like parameters and you iterate until you get like a good structure. And so you're like, okay. No.
Thing is, you get the same structure from a variety of configurations.
Yeah, that's probably like a sanity check.
Or methods as well, perhaps.
Yeah,
a couple different methods.
I wonder if you can like introduce some sort of regularization into like fitting t-SNE so that
maybe, or even like some kind of metric, like it was already mentioned, like how do you even decide how well do you reduce dimensionality? And like if you reduce to like 2 or 3, you can visualize that and see if like labels cluster together and stuff. How do you even like evaluate it on like higher dimensionality if you want to just do feature extraction? Like despite of like simple low inner distances, high like outer distances between clusters. What are like the metrics? How can you score that?
Yeah, one of the things that's usually done with single cell data is you do a PCA on the data first before you do the UMAP, which I think acts as a noising step and makes the problem simple enough so that it's, you know, at most something like a 40-dimensional projection as opposed to like 2,500 onto 2.
So
I think this like issue is making me, it like makes me hesitant to just
that's what I was going to suggest. I shouldn't
like
interrupt.
that's
really opening.
Does it still record?
So
Yeah, you can like make conclusions out of it, definitely.
share the screen on share.
it's like cross-validation too, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
Just fit on part of the data.
Yeah.
And then see, here's the determinant method allows you to assign new things clusters after you fit. And you can do that. Otherwise, just fit on different subsets and see if you get the same things clustering with the same groups over and over again.
Yeah.
okay. That's
Right. Well, I've seen stuff like that.
I know with PCA, like if you have a PCA pre-prop, you have to apply PCA into your train and test data set. So that there's no like information. I guess like it's
it says
you can like learn the embedding on one data.
I can double check.
and transfer it over to another.
Yeah, if your algorithm allows you. Like
So shall I? Do other people have it?
Yeah, I can also.
Yeah, then you can just do the different.
The manual.
Method to train and also.
That's fine, okay.
You can also learn.
Sorry, maybe let's get back to lecture.
No, we don't have it, please.
Going on yours, yeah.
Screen.
I can't see, so.
Okay.
Oh, so yeah, you can.
I have the next.
Everyone has that screen? Okay. Do you have it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, now we talked about t-SNE. So t-SNE is a simple idea of enlarging in the embedding space. Now,
Sorry, we only have 30 minutes left. Maybe we can
That's
speak.
fine. So, we can continue.
I try to
time or
another
something.
time.
Yeah, so I believe if we finish one is
Okay, that
might be better, so yeah.
I finish in a few minutes.
Yeah, that's,
Take your time. Don't worry.
Okay.
I was just worried.
no, that's fine, so we can.
Sorry, that.
Don't worry.
So, and UMAP says that, okay, now let's, the equation 29 that you can see, it can be proved that it's equivalent to Keil divergence between the probability distributions in the input space and the
Sorry.
and then input space and the embedding space, although they use a different probability distribution in the embedding space. But in the input space, they still are using Gaussian distribution. And they are trying to minimize the Keil divergence between these two. Again, it's, as you see, UMAP, t-SNE, all of them are neighborhood algorithms. And these neighborhood algorithms, I can say they have some attractive forces, therefore modeling some attractive forces and some repulsive forces. So attractive forces between the points which are close to each other, but repulsive forces between the points which are far away from each other or dissimilar. And they do it iteratively usually. So UMAP also can be considered analyzed using fuzzy topological representation for both high dimensional data and the embedding space. And they try to algebraically, topologically speaking, they're trying to reduce the something called fuzzy topological representation between these two. And neural network-based dimensionality reduction, again, it started from RBM. So restricted Boltzmann. What is Boltzmann machine? So these are energy-based models. Okay, assume you have like in figure A, you can see that you have two layers of neurons or variables, whatever you call it, and these variables are connected to each other, either between layers or the neurons of each layer are connected to each other too. But if you restrict that in a way that the neurons of each layer are not connected to each other, then it's called restricted Boltzmann. And restricted Boltzmann machine's idea is this. I assume I have some visible layer V and some hidden layer. The second one, hidden layer H. Now, I wanna, this V layer, visible layer has some energy. I wanna copy the energy of this visible layer to the hidden layer. And so I try to reduce the difference of energies between these two layers. So kind of, it's, as you see, it's copying the energy layer by layer. And it's maximizing the likelihood, it uses maximum likelihood estimation for that. It also uses Gibbs sampling. So it samples once the hidden variable conditioned on the visible variable, and then samples visible variable conditions on the hidden variable. And Hinton, what did he say? He said, okay, we have a restricted Boltzmann machine. We have also neural network. Do you see any similarity between RBM and neural network?
I mean, get like the connected modules.
Yeah, exactly. RBM is just two layers of neural network. Okay, so you can see it as a two-layer network. If you the whole neural network is a stack of RBMs. So 2 by 2, every 2 layers you consider it. It's a stack of RBMs, and then you can copy information from visible to hidden of another one. Then the hidden of this becomes the visible for the another RBM. so you do it iteratively. And they used RBM for initialization of weights in the neural network. And they finally found out, oh, by the way, if we do that, the gradient vanishing problem is resolved. So if we initialize the weights by RBM, and then we use backpropagation for training the neural network, it talks about 2006, published in Science Journal, a breakthrough by Hinton. Deep metric learning. So it says that, okay, now deep metric learning says that I wanna learn an embedding space by some neural network, and I use the features of the neural network as learned features for manifold learning or dimensionality reduction. Assume you can do it in this way. Assume you have some cross entropy neural network for classification, right? Or whatever loss function that you have. Assume you consider the layer before the classification layer. That layer has some informative features. Why? Because in that layer, you must have discriminated the classes in a way that in the label layer, they become separated. Otherwise, they wouldn't become separated. Therefore, you can consider that as the embedding layer. So this is what we can consider as deep metric learning. And by the way, now we have reached to a point that we can see that you can say that neural network is encapsulating almost all algorithms that we have talked so far. Why? In a neural network, we are from a layer to another layer. We are either we're increasing the number of neurons or we're decreasing the number of neurons, right? If we are decreasing the number of neurons, what is it? Learning. It's dimensionality reduction. It's reducing the dimensionality, right? And it's nonlinear. Why? Because you have nonlinear activation function. So you have a linear projection. If you don't have nonlinear activation functions, your whole network collapses into one linear projection. But you have nonlinear projection, therefore it becomes nonlinear. So you have nonlinear dimensionality reduction when the number of neurons are reduced. If in going from one layer to another layer, the number of neurons increase, what is it? Can someone say? Assume from one layer to another layer, the number of neurons are increased. You go from a layer of 3 neurons to a layer of 10 neurons. Kernel. It's a kernel. What does kernel do? Kernel increases the dimensionality and transforms it to a Hilbert's, to a higher dimensional space, hoping that the data becomes kind of linear. Do you remember when we were talking about kernel PCA? We said we can handle nonlinear data in 2 ways. Either we design a nonlinear algorithm or we transform data using kernels and hoping they become linear. So as you see, both kernels and all of these ideas are kind of being learned automatically by neural network.
What if you keep it constant?
What?
What if you keep the number of neurons constant?
Then you are transforming in the same space by nonlinear transformation. So for example, you have some data points, you move them in the same space to another place by nonlinear transformation. This is what you are doing.
What's the intrinsic dimension for kernel? Most of the time, kernel, the size of the kernel is almost the number of points times the number of points. But what's like an intrinsic dimension of the kernel?
There's usually a rank of the kernel. Usually the kernels are low rank because you don't have all points next to each other. Some points are next to some of their neighbors and some points are.
The rank is determined by what? Does it determine by the distribution choice? Like for example, Gaussian T, either Gaussian distribution or T student distribution.
I don't know.
Have the same.
I should look it up. I don't know that. But if anyone knows, does anyone know how we should determine the rank of the kernel? It's a good question. I should look it up. But I think it's a good thing. But a rank of kernel is related to Nystrom method, Nystrom approximation. Search it, and that's an interesting thing. Nystrom approximation says that I can approximate a positive semi-definite kernel or the matrix by some of its rows and columns. It's symmetric, so you just take a subset of columns or rows, and you why? Because when, for example, you have points A, B, C, if you know the distance of A, B, and you know the distance of AC, B and C can't be anywhere. So there is a restriction for B and C, something like that. So the rank of kernel is related. I don't know how to calculate it, but I know that it's related to Nystrom approximation, and that's for approximating a positive semi-definite matrix or kernel by some of its rows and columns. So Siamese net. So one of the ideas, the breakthroughs in deep metric learning was Siamese network. What is Siamese network? It says that assume that I have 2 or 3 copies of the same network, or I have the same network and I feed it twice or 3 times. Doesn't matter. Okay, so they are kind of sharing their weights. Now assume I have anchor, positive, negative triplets in a way that anchor and positive belong to the same class, but negative is from another class. So a neighbor and distant kind of. I want to push the embedding of anchor and positive toward each other, but pull away the embedding of this negative point, right? This is what the losses for Siamese network do, such as triplet loss or contrastive loss. They are proposed by Google and Facebook. So what does triplet loss does here? For example, this is look at the right figure. So you have anchor point by green point. The blue point is the
I got it. Sorry,
no,
I was gonna say.
That's fine.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah. So green point is the anchor, blue point is the positive point, and red point is the negative point. So you want to push the embedding in the embedding space. You want to push P to anchor and N away. And you do that in a way that there is a margin between the positive and the negative. You see that. You do it until.
Is the same as a Fisher vector? Can we see that as the same thing?
The idea is almost the same. As I said, the core idea between all supervised manifold learning methods is to increase the interclass variances and decrease the interclass variances. This is what it is doing. So it is increasing the interclass variances by this margin. Also pulling that neighbor to the anchor, so decreasing the intraclass variance as well. So this is the core idea between all. So you can see a century has passed, but the idea has been the same. Doesn't go. So variational autoencoder, Maxwell et al. Said that, okay, now we had variational invariance, let's make it in an autoencoder format. So do you recall the elbow that we talked about? We are maximizing that or minimizing that KL divergence. We can do it by expectation maximization, right? Assume you have two sets of parameters, theta E and theta D. By the way, you can do it in a encoder-decoder setup. They said that. So assume you have theta E for encoder and theta D for decoder, where encoder takes care of E step in the expectation maximization, and decoder takes care of M step. So they did it in this way, and that's an interesting thing. So they also approximate elbow by Monte Carlo sampling. So it's different from reconstruction autoencoder in a way that you need to sample in the latent space because they are doing Monte Carlo approximation, right? And you can also train by backpropagation where you don't do it E step and M step. You optimize the whole thing by one shot, but you still need Monte Carlo approximation for calculating the elbow, right? And GAN was proposed. It was another breakthrough. It was adversarial learning, saying that, okay, I have a generator which tries to generate some fake data, and I have a discriminator. I want to discriminate these from the real data, and they compete with each other. They want to become strong. So this was adversarial learning, and adversarial autoencoder said, okay, I use the same idea, but for dimensionality reduction and for in an adversarial setup, in an autoencoder setup. Because as you see, GAN is not an autoencoder. It has only a generator and a discriminator. However, let's make it autoencoder and let's call it adversarial autoencoder. They compared it with variational autoencoder. So here, so they do this in these steps. First off, they try to reconstruct data similar to reconstruction autoencoder. in a way that you have B1, B2, B3. See, look at the below figure. And for B1 and B2, once you consider it for reconstruction, you try to minimize the reconstruction error between X and X hat. So you optimize B1 and B2. However, you try to try to also optimize B1 and B3 in an adversarial learning setup, saying that, okay, assume I want to discriminate between some prior on the latent space and the latent space that you have. In order by this adversarial learning, the autoencoder tries to improve itself in order to make the latent space to similar to some distribution. So I want what?
I was just wondering, so would this not be equivalent to just a VAE, but you put more weight on the KL term? Like if you want to make the latent distribution as similar to the prior.
Okay.
Like is that sort of doing the same thing?
No, the thing is that KL divergence in VAE, you are reducing the KL divergence between the prior and the conditional distribution, right? This is what in VAE we do. But in the adversarial autoencoder, we are trying to improve that by having a discriminator saying that, okay, I generate some latent data. I try that's assumed it's a fake data. But I also have a prior, an actual prior, such as Gaussian. I want to discriminate these two by a discriminator. That's an adversarial learning. But that's a KL divergence. You're saying that these are equivalent? I don't think so. Not sure.
Or at least the objective. It seems similar to me, but I can look more into it.
Yeah, because this discriminator is a sigmoid, and at the end sigmoid, I think they are not using KL divergence for that. So the loss is different for the discriminator there. Although they are doing the same thing, I agree. They are doing the same thing. However, by discriminator using a sigmoid, they are trying to fool the discriminator in a way that they generate good latent space using to mimic the distribution of that latent actual prior. So this is what they are doing by adversarial learning. They're trying to impose the prior distribution on the latent space. But they are doing the same thing. Finally, our book is called Elements of Dimensionality Reduction and Manifold Learning. It's written by me, Mark Crowley, Fakhri Karay, and Ali Qudsi, and it's published by Springer. You can find it at Amazon, Google Books, and these things. It kind of has these parts. So it has a preliminaries first, after introduction, all of this. It has preliminaries on linear algebra, optimization, and kernels. So you can read those in order to understand these concepts, and then it goes to spectral methods and probabilistic methods and to neural network-based methods. And I think you can see it as a Bible for the it's about 600 pages. I know the number of pages is not important. What is inside is important, but you can see it, I think, as a Bible for this. And finally, dimensionality reduction as a point. Let's get philosophical. The world is in the Hilbert space. But why? Because Hilbert space is very huge, right? Very high dimensional. The world is in the Hilbert space and is vast and all-encompassing. But it is so simple and falls on a low-dimensional submanifold. This is the whole world. Thank you for your attention. Sorry that it took a lot of time.
Fine. So
We can schedule another time.
yeah,
for you
sure,
also.
for sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I apologize.
Benjamin has, for example, 14,000 pair of poems in Persian, Arabic, English, so every language. So yeah, I am very glad to work with him because he can do anything. So yeah.
I appreciate it.
I think some students are asking, is it possible to share the slide?
Yeah, sure.
I already have them, so I can send them out.
Sure.
So also maybe he want to use these, for example, the slide as a book tour. So if you have any comments on way that he, for example, presented or way that he can.
Network area, I think it's we will have more interesting neural network methods, but I think it's getting further and further away from being theoretical. I don't know why. I think both theory and neural network-based approaches are important in mindful learning, because when you consider statistics and theory and linear algebra and optimization in it, it's very cool. It can even open door in other areas, but where it is going, I think it's more focusing on neural network-based approaches, and we are having also theory in neural network. It's not saying that in neural network we don't have theory. There have been papers recently on why neural networks are working. Even there is a paper in IEEE Transactions on information theory, very theoretical, explaining by probability bounds and pack learning and all of these areas why neural network is learning. This is so that we have understood mathematically why they are working. So we can work on that. And Hinton also has the idea, he has said it multiple times, now that backpropagation has shown its success, let's find another turning algorithm. That's why what he's doing here, propose forward, he's going back to restricted Boltzmann machine, his interest, and these areas. So this is also the hope of Hinton, that we can also, although there are many algorithms for learning, to training out neural networks, such as genetic algorithm, metaheuristic optimization, forward, or layer-wise greedy approach, like restricted Boltzmann machine, backpropagation. All of these are algorithms for the training neural networks. However, Hinton still is insisting we need to find another algorithm.
I may have a high-level question. So with so many dimensionality reduction methods at hand, how should we select the proper method? I know it may depend on the data set, but for some general 1D DNA or RNA data or 2D, 3D image data, are there any general guidelines to select the proper dimensionality reduction method?
Okay, would you like that? So, yeah, as you said, we have a lot of dimensional reduction algorithms. Which one to choose? First off, the spectral methods are slow, all right? Why? Why are they slow? They can't handle big data. Why? Because they're usually reduced, as we talked about, to generalized eigenvalue problems. If you give a huge matrix to an eigenvalue problem, it will hang, it will freeze, can't work, all right? So it can't handle big. But for small data, spectral methods are fast. So that's one. Probabilistic approach is also good because you want to learn some latent information. Yeah. There might be something which is not visible to you, right? But I think the most dominant area is now currently the neural network-based dimensionality reduction, because as we said, it kind of encapsulates many methods. Either it's dimensionality reduction non-linearly, or it's using kernel. So, now people are also working on different loss functions for how to find a better embedding space. And it's not an easy thing. You might think it's easy. No, soon that even for Siamese, we have hundreds of losses. Which one is better? Let's analyze them. Which one discriminates the classes better and sooner? Sooner is also important. Time is important for us too. So, but the disadvantage or the advantage of neural network-based methods is being able to handle big data. And that's the problem of nowadays. We have a lot of data. So we usually have big data. That's why we usually like deep learning, and because we can handle big data. However, as we said, this is a philosophy of life, because as Galileo said, life is written by math. Also, math, this is a philosophy of math too. Whatever you get, you lose something. It's impossible that you get something and you don't lose something. We have gotten handling big data, but we have lost the pace. We have become slower to train. Spectral clustering, by a second you get the answer, or spectral dimensional reduction. However, when you go to deep learning, it might take days or months. So yeah, so these are the advantages and disadvantages. based on whether you have dealing with big data or small data, with what pacing you need, and these things you should choose.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, I also have a question. So you mentioned that in real life, we like nowadays have a lot of big data, but I also wonder about like the quality of the data. So how sensitive are like probabilistic or spectral methods to say outliers, and like what should you choose if your data is not really clean, or at least you can guarantee it's like very good quality?
Yeah, that's a good question. First off, it's better to do a pre-processing, although the dimensionality reduction itself is a pre-processing, but you can do a pre-processing for pre-processing and do some outlier removal and these things. But we can analyze which one is better for in handling outliers and these things. For example, if you are talking about neural network based in different losses, among different losses, you can also analyze mathematically which one is more robust to outliers. For example, if you have a loss function which has L1 norm and you have L2 norm, of course L1 norm is more robust to noise, but again, you got something, you're losing something, gradient at 0 and this, so it's not smooth. Although you do it numerically, but again, it's hard to deal with in optimization. So in spectral methods or in probabilistic methods, you can see when you look at if it's using a square or something, it means that it's not much robust to outliers, although they usually use a square for becoming smooth and differentiable. So yeah, you can choose which one is by looking at their loss functions and also under formulations. You can easily see which one is more robust and the other one to the outliers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so questions. So as you said, neural network based dimension reduction is kind of the future that you think, but so far we haven't seen a very generalizable neural network dimension reduction method that can, just like t-SNE or PCA, that apply to sort of everywhere, right? It's more like it's one part of the problems and then you tailor the loss for your problems and stuff. So do you see in the future we will have like a generalized neural network based dimension reductions, or you just keep going as like we tailor problems in neural networks for dimension reduction?
Yeah, I think we might have more generalized neural network, but I think that there are some reasons for why UMAP and t-SNE are used more. First off, their speed. They are much faster, especially if you are not up to some point, they are fast. Maybe after some point when you become very, very big data, t-SNE goes and can't, it freezes. But UMAP is much faster than t-SNE. But again, so that's one the reason I think. Another reason is that I think it's one line of code for why, because UMAP and t-SNE are mostly used by DNA people. People in biotechnology, they use it a lot. If you see many of their papers, in order to encode and find the genes and features of fingerprints of the genes, they are using UMAP and t-SNE. And so it's like a black box. You can use it very simple, but neural network is not that much black box. You need to code. So these are some reasons behind in industry why there is. Also, but I think neural network based approaches, if you code and you have the knowledge and you have time, they might even outperform UMAP and t-SNE if you choose a good loss function. And another good reason for using that UMAP and t-SNE are used a lot, because they are they are being used to visualize the features learned by neural networks. If you want to use a neural network to visualize the features of another neural network, then it will be a cycle and it never ends. For visualizing the features of that neural network, we need another neural network. It goes until it will be a chain in logic. It never ends. You need to use something which is not neural network for visualizing the features of neural network.
Are t-SNE and UMAP only used for data visualization? Like it's never like a latent analysis tool, right? Like latent variable analysis. For t-SNE and UMAP, like they're only for visualization, like they would never be used for.
No, they can be used for the dimensionality reduction, but they're mostly data visualization.
Does anyone actually do it though, or is it just they can? Like in practice, do you ever see that happening?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but in industry, they usually use if people in industry machine learning people usually use deep learning for
so it's like coding, especially for example for t-SNE, you cannot use that right away as a dimensional reduction. It's need coding because when new sample comes, it's not easy to find in which cluster it's, for example, fall. So it's kind of coding for that. I'm not sure about UMAP, but this is possible.
Okay.
Stop recording the things, right?
We're still recording, actually.
Okay.
All right. If no more questions, let's thank the presenters.
I appreciate your invitation. Thank you very much for
Thank you for your